Hi there again. I was a very strong critic of U.S. federal law enforcement for a case here in Portland, a very high-profile case called the Portland Christmas tree bomber case. And because of that, I ended up in the program, in the TI program, sort of a modern COINTELPRO. I think it might be called Disrupt and Discredit, or Disrupt and Destroy, D&D for short. But the idea is very much like the old Stasi program, to basically decompose the person's life, ruin their relationships, get them fired from their job when they're out of money, and then they're homeless and they get sick and then they die. And then do that to their whole family if you really don't like them. That is a real deal. That is a real program that's happening. And I think what has to happen is we need a kind of a church committee. It was a committee in 1976 to look at, the oversight of our federal law enforcement, because we blew past 1984, well on our way to 2084 with our law enforcement just having no oversight whatsoever and doing these extrajudicial killings. So I'm making this to first of all say, no, I'm not crazy. Two, it's as real as toothpaste, and we need to stop it, and we need to have some kind of congressional investigation and oversight, and it just has to stop. It's these type of harassment campaigns are completely illegal. They use all the break-in, warrantless search break-in powers through the Patriot Act, and so all these things need to be corrected from an oversight point of view as well as from a legal point of view.
Hi, George Swigert here from nomoreinformants.com. A few folks on the blog asked me to put together a matrix of what the disposition matrix looks like. This is the U.S. federal law enforcement organization's plan for every person in the United States and how to deal with them, all the way from target lists down to targeting them for harassment campaigns. And it looks something like this. You can Google disposition matrix. It's on Wikipedia. But here's kind of a schematic of the 300 million citizens in the United States. There's various organizations that are in charge of putting together watch lists or targets. Fusion centers, sometimes Neighborhood Watch, organizations like InfraGard, which are very patriotic people, but meetings are held to talk about how power plants and water treatment plants could be poisoned, and just basically creating a lot of fear. So what comes out of this is a suspect list. And there's our friends right now coming by and adding a little background music to our thing here. Anyway, it comes down to this target list here, and Snowden in his release had 7,500 names. We don't really know if these are just high-level targets or they could be more what they call deep dive targets. But once you get to this list of targets, that's really where the law enforcement agencies take over to decide on, how are we going to dispose of the people on this list. Now, sometimes people will just be watched on this list. Sometimes they're going to be targeted for harassment. But you see FBI, CIA, DEF, ATF, the United States Secret Service, and many others. There's about 100 different federal law enforcement agencies, believe it or not, including folks like the Park Service, and then a lot of different people that groups that you think would never have an enforcement capability, but they all can basically create this list down here, which is harassment targets. Harassment targets. This isn't a fun program. This is a COINTEL type program. And these 1,000 to 5,000 people, this ends in death. There's been a lot of famous people that have been victims of this program. It started originally with paid informants. There's 10 times as many more informants now than there was during the Vietnam War. That was in 2008 when the FBI last reported how many informants they had. But the huge growth is over here in volunteer informants. People who have been kind of tricked in a way into thinking that they're doing the right thing for their neighborhood or doing the right thing for their community. A lot of times the folks that are first responders, thinking that they're protecting their community, Basically, these folks can just say, we have a person of interest, we'd like you to do various things to harass them with various activities, and they give them a list of activities that they can provide. But that's it. Pretty much that is the disposition matrix. It's not just for foreign terrorists anymore, it's for U.S. citizens. And the sad part about this whole situation is the targeting has moved more and more and more since 2001 away from actually criminals toward innocent people. And I can talk about that in a later video about confiscation and how and informants making commissions and how that skewed the incentives for the law enforcement. Today I'd like to focus on a guy by the name of Gary Webb. There's a picture of him. Sorry about the light there, but this is on my website, Report Until Death. It's dedicated to reporters who basically have given their life to their reporting of government overreach or government programs. As you can see here, Gary won the Pulitzer Prize, and he exposed the CIA bringing up crack or cocaine from Central America to fund the Contras. So it's very. He was killed in a he had a forced suicide through government harassment, and actually knew people who knew Gary, who talked about his last days of desperation. There are other folks on here like Michael Hastings, who was murdered when he was trying to expose a federal program. David Byrd, who wrote about the oil industry, who disappeared for a year, said he fell into a river. And then a guy by the name of Michael Rupert, who was a narcotics investigator in Los Angeles for about 30 years and broke the story that the government was involved in selling narcotics through CIA operatives in the LA area. So this site here, I'll continue to add people that have given their lives and have kind of been forced into suicide. There's Aaron Schwartz, obviously, was a big thorn in the government's side with PIPA and SOPA and other internet programs. So that's Report Until Death. One good thing is that they actually made a movie about Gary's life, and if you have a chance, go see it. It's called Kill the Messenger, and it was $10 on Google Play and other outlets, but now it's on Redbox, so you can see it for 99 cents. It's an excellent movie. Jeremy Renner, a fantastic actor, well-made movie, really the first one since All the President's Men, really, that tells a true story of an investigative reporter. Thanks. That's all for now. George Swigert at nomoreinformants.com. I wanted to do a quick video to kind of update my other videos on harassment in the United States. You're all familiar with the FBI. You should Google this word, COINTELPRO. This is the system of harassment, basically, the FBI developed over a 50-year period. Really was originally targeting Russian agents, but later it was about disrupting the lives of leaders in groups like the Black Panther Party. A couple of the leaders were killed there, Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali had a file. Just about everybody famous from all the world of entertainment. A lot of the political leaders had a FBI file. Martin Luther King, they actually sent him a suicide letter recommending that. So the 60s, very turbulent time. A lot of COINTELPRO being used to disrupt their lives. Even was used on groups like PETA later on, but mainly targeted at groups. Where that changed and harassment changed in America was the CIA, which was mainly focused on the Department of Defense and the Pentagon, overseas operations and so forth. But in the Eisenhower administration, they got into a little bit of trouble. Eisenhower warned of the military-industrial complex and folks like CIA lying to him, and they lied to him about several operations and ran operations without the permission of the president. Kennedy actually wanted to break up the CIA into 1,000 pieces. So that's when the CIA said, hey, we have to start getting a greater presence in the U.S., which they did over that period of time. But when it really took off was when basically George Tenet sent a letter in these 28 pages, the Saudi 28 pages, basically outlining the creation of DHS, something called fusion centers, and InfraGard. DHS is a clearinghouse of federal, state, and local law enforcement and many other data sources. The whole idea, you've seen the NSA, collecting all your texts and collecting all your phone calls and collecting all your emails and so forth. That's what it's doing. It's doing a map database, or what they call a graph database, of you and all your friends. And this is for every person in the United States. The data is stored in Utah. Now, these 70 fusion centers are more on a state-by-state basis. There's actually a few more. I think there's like 68 or 69 of them. And they work with the local state law enforcement to create target lists. So from this massive group of 300 million people that DHS maintains, these fusion centers are more concerned about the terrorism watch list, which has up to 2 million people on it. So this isn't the no-fly list the FBI does. This is the terrorism watch list, which has 2 million people. From this list, it's some sort of a funnel. You can choose to target people for surveillance. You can choose to target them for active surveillance, which is a more involved version of surveillance, where you have sort of a box around the person all the time, every day, and you let them know that they're being watched. And then finally, this third form of harassment is actually you combine that with home invasions at night. There's a way of incapacitating the people in a home and then actually doing home invasions. So this is the kind of the blacklist, if you will, where there's a box around you during the whole day, and then at night you have these home invasions. And the result isn't just, lose your job or break up your marriage or so forth, or have your friends drop you and your relatives stop communicating with you. The idea here is death, and that could be either through suicide, which is the most common form, also death by cop. A lot of people commit suicide that way. Or the other one is you have these active shooters that we see so much now. So it's all a product really of the CIA's derivation. And instead of targeting people who are politically motivated, this can be anybody. Since fusion centers take money from Fortune 500 companies, you could take a competitor out with this program. You could take out innocent people that you just don't like for whatever reason. If you're a critic of the Pentagon, if you had a sexual harassment lawsuit, if you had a lawsuit against a Fortune 500 company, there's many, many different ways. And this is where it's kind of turned from more of a national security focus to more of a kind of almost a government mafia, this system here. That's my update. I wanted to do kind of a follow-up to my last video about informants and informants' role in harassment and asset seizure. In my last video, you can look at it. We talked about how things used to be more FBI-driven, a program called COINTELPRO. The CIA then kind of came in and created the Department of Homeland Security after 9/11, and then created fusion centers, created volunteer organizations for informants, plus a whole series of paid informants. And that kind of changed things. It kind of went from a public officer, sworn officer kind of environment, and has moved now more into private contractors, paid informants, and other things. And that kind of throws off the incentives for law enforcement. The law enforcement now is moved toward identifying people's competitors, identifying squeaky wheels like people who might have filed lawsuits, or identifying personal enemies or places where there's personal gain. In terms of who's on the target list and who's on the watch list. And interesting kind of number is we have 20 times more informants now than we did during the Vietnam War. So even at the height of the Vietnam War, with all the CIA and FBI informants, we have 20 times more now. And how has this been done? And how could this possibly be hidden in the budget? Well, the first thing is felons. Using felons and their family to work off time is a very effective way of getting basically a free informant army. Not only do you get a day off when you go out, instead of being behind bars, you go out and be an informant for one day, you get a day off. But if you enlist your family, your brother, your brothers, and maybe your wife, and even your kids, you can get more time off. So very quickly you can work down your sentence. So this has been the Department of Justice's very effective method here. Can't remember the exact time, but it's basically a compensating service or something like that. The other way to do paid informants is through all the different social programs that are offered. Social Security disability insurance is just one of the ways, but if I can help an informant, a person who's maybe kind of down on their luck or maybe homeless, if I can help them get into Social Security disability insurance, or a group like Narcotics Anonymous, or some of the other groups that'll pay rent, pay food, get them an oral, food stamps card, etc. That is also another great area of way of building up your informant force. Then the other way I could do it is contractors. If I can go to the government contractor list and say, here's all the people who cut my grass, here's all the people that are electricians and plumbers, and here are all the people that work in for the railroad or the gas company or the water company or all those different folks, and I have meetings about terrorism and talk about InfraGard and ask them to be volunteers to identify potential risks, then I can get a whole bunch of people that are volunteers. And all I have to do is basically give them an incentive for bringing people, for getting people in trouble. It's kind of like having a private police force or a private prison. If you paid people with the incentive of every time they arrested someone, you're going to get a lot more arrests. And there actually is incentives in place for these informants to get rewarded when they seize assets. So we've got this kind of informant asset seizure loop going on here with all these folks. Not so much these folks, because I think they probably think they're being pretty patriotic, but there's kind of this odd incentive to go after people that may not actually be terrorism risks at all. As a matter of fact, they may just have a lot of assets, and we can target them in a lot of ways. We can intercept their communications, and if they're on bad websites, or we could intercept their email, or we could do a lot of different things to entrap them to seize their assets. And so that's actually how we kind of moved from more of a public sworn officer type of thing to more of a public-private partnership, to now where it's almost all privatized. We've privatized the informant industry through contractors and these other types of informant groups.